Okay, so my first question, because we are doing a research topic about a particular area of crime and something we want to delve into about it. So I did want to look into hate crimes and a lot about sort of motivation and kind of why people do what they do. So do we know where the central motivation to commit these acts come from? Is it primarily from people's backgrounds, bad experiences they had?
So that's really interesting, and I have to say, I'm sure there may be some studies on there. I'm not really familiar with it. But what I can tell you is that there are a number. So hate crimes have been increasing over the past couple of years, and there've been a lot of people surmising what that may be. And when you think about organizations that like to recruit people, they tend to prey on people who might be either bitter for some reason, or weakness, or have some type of prejudice. But obviously anyone who commits a crime against someone else because of their membership in a protected class is an individual that harbors not only a lot of hatred and animus, but prejudice as well.
Yeah. Okay. And in what way do we see these people justify their crimes if they attempt to do so? And I guess just where do they tend to place the blame?
I think at least in some of the instances that are probably well known and publicized, they people will say, well, I committed this. In fact, there was one recent case, or actually, if you look at the Dylan Roof case, so the Dylan Roof is the barbarous monster that shot 9 people. He walked into their place of worship, and he later said, I'm doing this because I don't like black people because you rape our women and commit crimes and things like this. So that's what he said, and that was his justification for his hatred. I mean,
right.
So usually, again, based on some prejudice or stereotype, but a lot of people harbor prejudice and stereotypes. They don't believe that they need to exterminate people because of them.
And so you said earlier that we see hate crimes sort of increasing over the past few years. And I think today, now more than ever, especially prior to the civil rights movement, prior to a lot of those things that allowed more equality to come to minority groups, that today hating certain groups isn't really popular anymore. Yeah, do you know what I mean by that? Just sort of that, it's not like you can't sit around like a dinner table and have like your...
It's not politically correct to
engage
in those types of conversations.
Yes.
Yeah. Whereas, so that's interesting. I mean, I think that one thing that's been constant is there have always been people who have been prejudiced, had stereotypes, have been racist, anti-Semitic, anti-gay. There have always been people who have harbored prejudices. There have been a subset of those people who've acted on those prejudices, and I don't think that's anything different than today. And there have always been people who have said it shouldn't matter who you are, and I think that's all true. I think that's all true, and that's been true the entire time. I think when we start to think about collecting data is really important, so we know more about the types of crimes and the types of things that that are happening. But maybe to your question, if I understand you correctly, there's probably been a lot of open racial animus that you saw like in the first part of this century and prior to that. We don't really see it as openly now, or we're not used to seeing it as openly now.
Right.
But again, I have to challenge that notion, because I have in the last few years seen more than I've ever seen in my own lifetime of open racial animus, where it's okay to tell, a person of Latin descent don't speak Spanish in the store. Things like that. Like you openly see people being very hostile.
Yes. And so in my research, I've sort of seen a lot of kind of big picture details, but people tend to kind of skip out on the smaller details that you would think would be kind of important. So I wanted to ask, what kinds of crimes do we see these perpetrators engaging in that later become categorized as hate crimes? Is it mostly assault, murder?
Yeah, there's so I don't have in front of me right now the statistics, but you can look at the FBI. The FBI keeps track, and one would argue whether or not they keep very good track is debatable, but the Bureau of Justice Statistics has all these statistics, and they can tell you, here are the number of hate crimes reported, and here's what we're seeing, whether it's assaults, murders, property, violence. So all of those are available, and I want to say that the vast number are assaults, but you would have to verify that.
Okay, yeah. So is there a correlation between the type of act that is committed and the target of this prejudice? Like, is it mostly assaults on black individuals or rape against gay individuals? Like, is there a pattern?
That's a really good question and really good information to tease out. And I think, again, I would just have to point you to those statistics to tell you that.
Okay. And so that we often see that in my research, I've encountered more than once that statistics reveal that the most common targets of hate crimes are black individuals, and that the second most are Jewish individuals, which I did find a pretty stark contrast from one to the other. And that in opposition to this, what are the groups that we mostly see as the perpetrators?
I would imagine, again, but I think these white male individuals typically would be the largest group of perpetrators. Although, when we're talking about this and we're saying perpetrators and victims and things, and we can only really rely on the statistics that we have reported, and the reporting is imperfect because it could be that someone has been the victim of a crime where the perpetrator was motivated by some bias, but it doesn't get reported as such. So, and that's a difficulty, I think, over the next, I think that's one of the most urgent things we need to take care of is making sure that we get adequate information.
And so where do we see these crimes occurring? Do we see them mostly in the public sphere or the private sphere of social life? Do we see them as sort of grand acts on a stage, people trying to get attention for what they're doing? Or are they more like they come to these people in private areas?
Again, really, that's a very good question. You have a future as like a researcher or definitely like a PhD person who studies these things. I can't answer that off the top of my head because I want to be very precise. And there are people who study this, and so you could find that information from someone who studied. But I will say, from what I know, it can happen in many different ways. I mean, obviously someone like Dylan, and again, I'm just giving you anecdotal evidence. Obviously someone like Dylan Ruth came to these people in their private, place of worship, but it was a mass shooting in 9 people, so that's kind of a grand act. There are other crimes that, other situations that may not have, that they may be crimes of opportunity. Someone, they're fighting over a parking space, but then they decide that they're going to kill this person because of their religion, or they're wearing a headscarf or something like that. And so I think I think what we need to understand is that it can happen in any of those situations that you identified.
Okay, so I would say, because I'm also in a class talking about immigrants, migrants, and refugees, and that's been a really high point of interest for me. So I wanted to sort of evaluate that over the past couple decades, especially with the current president, that we see a lot of scare tactics that are attempting to portray especially Mexican immigrants in a very negative light. And so I just wanted to know, have there been observable correlations between increased maybe hate crime rates and these certain immigrant individuals?
Well, so I thought you it's funny. I don't know, but I thought you were going to ask about Donald Trump, and there actually has been a study. Someone found that after he would get up and make a big speech, there would be a surge in hate crimes against different types of individuals. So and we certainly saw. So I just say that to say that definitely the words of our leaders matter, and also big political social moments and acts can impact it. There was after 2001, after the September 11th attack, there was a huge there was a spike in hate crimes against those who appear to be Muslim Americans. And I say that because people were even attacking Sikhs, which are not Muslim individuals, but because they had headscarves, people again very ignorant, were not able to even tell the difference, and so perpetrated violence against people who were not even their intended targets.
And how do perpetrators of hate crimes sort of engage with their communities? Like, do we see them kind of actively involved in, like, perhaps a hate group or maybe some kind of online blog, anything like that? Are they more antisocial? Do they engage normally in their community?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So it would be interesting to have like a criminal profile of someone who's likely to commit a hate crime, but I think that we need to really emphasize the importance of the internet as a recruiting tool, because the it's a huge recruiting tool, not only for someone who wants to engage in terroristic acts, but again, you find these people who are lonely, isolated, or have some axe to grind, and then they find this community online, and they can become radicalized domestic terrorists. And that's what we're seeing right now. When you have a bunch of these people who marched in Charlottesville, but again, these groups have always existed. The internet is just providing them a different mode of community, but it's one that's very easy. It used to be you wanted to have a meeting. I don't know, what did you have to send out flyers and make phone calls and all that? Now you can just press a button, you open your computer, and it's all there for you.
Right. And so, are there any warning signs that we see that a perpetrator might be contemplating, or in that sort of place where they can incubate those kind of hateful feelings towards other people? Do we have any long-term or short-term warning signs? Can we predict?
Yeah, I think there are always warning signs. Let me tell some stuff. There may not always be warning signs, but I think there are some pretty strong signs that we should not ignore. Again, people, who they're engaging with online or in person. What kinds of literature are they reading and collecting in their home? Again, people who oftentimes have, lots of gangs have their own signs and symbols, and hate crime groups are no different. And so you may see different markings or different things that indicate a membership in a certain organization that's known to perpetuate not just words, right, but violence as well. So yes, so I think that there are some signs that should not be ignored. As a law enforcement officer, you have to be careful though, because we still have constitutional rights to say, like, you can put anything you want on your body. You can associate, the freedom of association, associate with whoever you want. But I think that when that starts to become violent and you're going to threaten harm to other people, you have to be really careful about that.
Right. And what are some reasons that an individual might not report a hate crime? Or do we see in most cases that maybe people don't understand that a certain act against them is a hate crime? I would assume that a perpetrator might say some kind of slur or something and then it could process, but what if they don't say anything? Do these people know they're being attacked because of their ethnicity or religion?
Right, and yeah, that's a really good point, because in order for us, law enforcement agencies are supposed to report hate crimes, but they can only report what they identify as a hate crime. And if a person leaves out, some important facts, then it might not be reported as a hate crime. It might not even be, prosecuted as a hate crime because of some infirmities in the evidence or whatever. But yeah, I think that, and also remember, hate crimes, so how we get hate crimes, there's a statute, it will have elements, and usually these hate crimes act as an enhancement to a penalty that already exists. So if you assault someone, there's already a crime, a statute on the books for assault, and it's going to carry with it a certain amount of punishment. What the hate crimes laws do is they serve to enhance those penalties. So and so the prosecutor has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt every single element. And so one of the elements is they have to prove that because this person, that the perpetrator committed the act because of the person's membership in a protected class. And that can be a hard burden to prove, and there's different ways you can do it. But again, if the person doesn't tell you, oh, they used a racial slur while they were doing it, and I saw this literature, in their car, and they had this and that tattoo, and they were telling me, Dylan Roof's case made it really easy. He said that that's why he was doing it.
Yeah.
And again, somebody who's motivated like this, they may say it, but they may not. And so you're right. It could be hard. It can be hard to prove. There are ways to prove it, but it can be hard.
And so how do we see hate crimes impacting communities, as in maybe physical communities, if they take place within a certain neighborhood or a certain area? How are those communities affected? Or if maybe a sort of metaphorical community, like the Black community or the Latinx community?
Yeah. No, so what's really interesting is that, hate crimes, the reason why there's, so one argument against having hate crimes is, well, if you assault somebody, you already have a statute for that. If you murder someone, we always have a statute for that, and the punishment is pretty severe and can be death in some cases. So why do you need to enhance? In fact, in that situation, you can't enhance the penalty. And the reason, one important reason that we have hate crimes legislation is because of the symbolism that it has. To basically, and it's double-sided, symbolizing on one hand, saying to this group, you're important, you matter, no one should be singled out because of their membership in a protected class. And on the other hand, on the other side, it's a message. We punish, when we think about why we punish to deter people from acting in a certain way. And so we're also saying, and hey, perpetrators, don't think about doing this, or else you're going to face an enhanced penalty. So there's a lot of symbolism there, but that symbolism without enforcement can be dangerous too.
So for my final question, I wanted to ask sort of what your opinion is about how do you see sort of the natures of hate crime changing over the next 5 years, over the next decade? just over the next significant point in time, do you see it maybe taking on different forms? Do you see it increasing, decreasing?
I unfortunately think that we are likely to see an increase in crimes perpetrated because of a victim's membership in a protected class. What that protected class is, whether they're Black, Jewish, Latinx, or a member of the LGBT community, I think that we are likely to see more crimes. I think the reason for that is there's so much rhetoric now. For when your economy is doing great and everyone's doing well, everyone can kind of coexist. If your economy takes a nosedive, people immediately begin to look for scapegoats, and this has happened throughout our history. Throughout our nation's history, you can see it visibly play out. And I think that another economic downturn and the way the demographics of our country are going, some people are just going to be upset that there are people that don't look like them that seem to be more successful or enjoying fruits of what they believe should be theirs. So I think that we will see that. I think you asked about the nature of hate crimes. I think that's interesting because I don't know, but again, like we said, like the internet has made it so easy for groups to form and communities to come about, and that's been, in some ways, that's been a good thing if we, think about online communities and all the good that they bring. But also, again, the double-sided nature of online communities in the context of domestic terrorism, I think we're likely to see that as well. And we know that when people, one thing we know from criminal law is that when people feel like they have a group behind them, feel like when they're members of a group, this is why we punish things like conspiracy and accomplice liability. When people feel like they have those things, they feel stronger, they feel emboldened, and so yes, and so I think that we're likely, as crimes change too, the nature of all crimes, we're likely to see hate crimes evolve in the same manner.
Right. Well, that was my final question. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you. Yeah, this is a great project.